Welcome everyone to IDT's Introduction to Hyland RPA webinar. My name is Michael Nolfo. I'm the president of IDT. I'm excited to have everyone here today. Also excited to introduce Rich Rowe, RPA Solutions Engineer and Hyland Software for Hyland Software. Rich, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Again, thank you for joining us. We have a lot to cover in today's agenda, but before we begin, just a quick housekeeping item. We will be recording today's session. So in interest of getting a clean recording, we will be muting all participants' microphones. But if you do have a question, please feel free to submit that in the chat section of Zoom, and we'll try to get to those questions at the end of today's session, or we can follow up with you individually after the webinar is completed. So as far as today's agenda goes, like I said, we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to begin by briefly talking about what robotic process automation is from IDT's perspective and why this is such an exciting technology and something we want all of our customers to get to know and embrace. I'm then going to hand it over to Rich, and Rich is going to cover the Hyland, provide an overview of the Hyland RPA suite, talk about some of the benefits that it provides. Rich is then going to touch on some use cases, do a quick demonstration. He's going to hand it back over to me to talk about the benefits of doing an RPA workshop, which we are actually offering to our existing Hyland OnBase customers that we're very excited about. So to begin, what is RPA, or what we commonly call robotic process automation? So let's start off with talking about what it isn't. It's not an actual mechanical robot that's doing actual physical tasks on an assembly line. I know that might be a little bit confusing from the name, but what actually RPA is a highly configurable software application that's used to replace human labor, specifically around repetitive or mundane tasks. And these are tasks that people usually don't want to do or are very time consuming. And this is always typically done around a set number of business rules or actions that we can define at the beginning of a process. So essentially what RPA does is it accumulates or emulates human keystrokes and mouse clicks to actually get a job done. So as many of you know, IDT is a longtime consultant and content services provider, and our mission is to work with our clients to look at ways to making their business processes more efficient, lower costs, and provide a better customer experience. And that's why we're so excited about introducing RPA as part of the Hyland OnBase solution stack. Hyland RPA offers a whole number of benefits, including very tangible savings, something that we can easily measure, which is very commonly what customers are looking for when we're building a proposal or use case. It offers a very low risk solution with a very quick payback, again, something that customers are very often looking for. It allows us to leverage the existing OnBase framework, which is very nice because that actually allows us to deploy RPA quickly and at a much lower cost. And then, of course, it offers a very measurable business process improvements. And this is something we're actually going to see as we talk through some of the use cases and demonstrations later today. So why consider RPA? Well, when you look at it from a market perspective, there's absolutely huge growth. The global RPA market has grown from 271 million back in 2016, all the way to 2.5 billion in 2020. As of last year, kind of an interesting statistic is that over 78% of organizations have implemented some type of RPA in their organization. And again, over 16% more plan to implement RPA in the next 3 years. So when you combine all this together, it just shows how much organizations are taking RPA very seriously. It has a projected growth of over 31% compound average growth rate over the next 4 years. So that growth that we're already seeing will continue to grow over the next several years. One of the interesting things that IDT finds interesting about the growth is how the SMB market has been such a significant contributor to this growth pattern. And that's not always the case with technology. One of the main reasons why the SMB market is paying such attention to RPA is because it has such a low cost of entry and offers such a rapid deployment. That actually, what that does is that lowers the acceptable risk and provides a really strong ROI. And this is something we're very excited to bring to our customers. When you pair that with the fact that companies overall are looking at automation technology that have declining costs and are increasing their tolerance for investment in streamlining operations, we have the perfect formula for why RPA is a good fit for organizations today. So some interesting surveys about why individual companies are looking at adopting an RPA type solution. So one of that is 90% of employees are actually burdened with menial tasks. These are tasks, again, that I mentioned earlier that people just don't want to do. And these tasks can be easily automated. This offers a tremendous labor savings opportunity that we can easily calculate by implementing an RPA process. And equally importantly, it provides an opportunity to have increased morale and job satisfaction. And this is increasingly important when you look at departments like HR that spend an inordinate amount of time retaining and or hiring and retaining talent. One of the main reasons why people leave their jobs or their places of employment is because they're just not stimulated or don't like their job or get bored with their job. This is something that RPA can address directly. Another interesting statistic is that over 86% of respondents agree that RPA improves productivity in their workplace. This is a great example of how you can actually take existing staff and repurpose them to higher skill sets. So in essence, you can get more out of your employee without necessarily paying them more. You can enjoy higher operating capacity equals happier employees, and this, all of this stuff together allows you to deliver a better customer experience. As we mentioned, with RPA, it does not require new IT infrastructure as it's added on to the OnBase solution. So you can leverage what you have. Why this is important is because this allows you to add this incrementally without lots of additional costs, and it keeps deployment times down. And as I also mentioned, there's no coding required when you implement an RPA solution. It's all configurable, so you don't need to worry about hiring programmers or having hard things to maintain or upgrade over time. All in all, organizations of all sizes are going big into RPA, and we think you should look at it too. So now let's look at an example of how a famous paper company adopted RPA to automate the mundane tasks of invoice processing, increase happiness in the workplace, and ultimately make their regional supervisor an office hero. Let's meet Kevin. Kevin is a longtime loyal employee that loves to make his boss happy. Fortunately, Kevin's workload is steadily growing, and it's taking him longer and longer to do the part of the job he hates the most, transposing loads of data from a collection of documents into his boss's famous spreadsheet. So every day, Kevin receives a batch of invoices on his desk with supporting documentation. He needs to sift through all of this and organize it, which has become very time consuming. Kevin then manually transposes all of this data from all the invoices and supporting documentation into his boss's famous spreadsheet and the associated rows and columns of data. And he has to be very careful not to make any errors. Now, at the end of every day, Kevin bundles up all this electronic documentation along with the associated spreadsheets and emails it to his regional manager, Michael. Let's meet Michael. This now has become hours of mindless data entry each day, and Kevin's absolutely miserable. So Michael, being an astute boss, noticed that Kevin is sending his reports later and later each day. He also notices that Kevin's reports are now becoming increasingly full of errors. And worst of all, he noticed that Kevin is unable to do some of the more important activities Michael likes, like helping him with his taxes or plan office parties. So Michael has a great idea. He recently sat in on a webinar from IDT and heard all about the exciting things that RPA can do, including doing a lot of the heavy lifting and freeing up his staff to do more important activities. So now let's look at the same paper company using RPA to reduce the amount of time it takes to process invoices and increase some of the efficiencies we talked about earlier. So initially, Michael got distracted during the RPA webinar and misunderstood what robotic process automation is all about. And he tasked his regional manager, Dwight, to build an actual robot to try and replace his staff. As you can imagine, this did not go well, resulting in Michael getting a non-functional robot called Robbie that could only sing show tunes. So back to the drawing board. To avoid further embarrassment, Michael got his IT department involved, who worked with their content solution provider to deploy an actual software RPA solution. This includes building a software bot to perform the mundane tasks that Kevin used to have to do. The bot now handles finding and extracting all the necessary data from the invoices and supporting documentation. It copies the data into the correct cell of the spreadsheet, making sure everything is correct without any errors, all in the right rows and columns. And then it bundles all of this together, both the invoices, supporting documentation, and the spreadsheets in a nice package, and delivers it to Michael before the deadline every day. Well, voila, this makes Michael ecstatic. He gets his reports before his deadline with no errors. Kevin now has time to help Michael plan his best office party, which leads Michael to getting a Dundie from his office staff. RPA has propelled Michael into legendary boss status. So hopefully this humorous little story kind of illustrates ways that RPA can help an organization. I'm now going to hand it over to Rich Rowe, and Rich is going to get into more specifics around the Hyland RPA suite and how it can help your organization.
As an Office fan, I was excited to hear the talk through of this process kind of leading up. Now, before I kind of go through my portion, I do just want to verify. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so once again, my name is Rich Rowe. I am a sales solutions engineer over here at Hyland, specializing in RPA automation. And when we're looking at implementing RPA in a given organization, what we really want to start looking for are good process candidates. Now, these can be, something that we discover along the way, even as we're moving through, identifying a larger solution or just working through pain points in an organization. Really, what we're looking for is any of that highly repetitive task that doesn't require a lot of, what I refer to as like institutional knowledge. So it's not something that's a variable workflow throughout the entire process. Now, in any of those previous examples, we're looking at kind of collating any of that data and making sure that we have a report at the end of it. That would be a really good repetitive process. We had a time frame that it needs to be done by. We had structured inputs, structured outputs. That idea of that rules-based sequence is really at the core of any RPA process. Now, as we're kind of selecting that optimal process and we're really going through proving it out and interacting with any of the pieces and parts, here are some of the questions that you might be looking at. So as you're evaluating this, how long does this process take? What is the process volume? Is it one process that takes an hour, or is it something that just kind of is a death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to your average workday? When we're looking at that input and output, we need a clean start and a clean finish to know that we're getting the job done right. We're going to wrap reporting around this to be able to show when and where this process is effective. We're also able to interact with a variety of different systems and applications. One of the great things about Hyland RPA is it really lives in the cracks between applications. So, we don't really need the monolith players like OnBase to automate, but OnBase is always a really good place to start. Think of it as an external facing workflow. We're able to build onto your existing implementation and then reach out and make any of those automations that you might need, or even prep things before it comes into OnBase. With those cognitive elements, really, what are we interacting with? Is it something that we need to OCR? Is it something that we need to make, complex decision making based on, a red detail in the body of a message? And then we're looking at that automation effort. Now, once again, this is all something that we're able to work hand in glove with you on, making sure that we're setting everybody up for the highest level of success. And I know at the end, we're gonna talk to what a workshop or a POC might look like for you, but I do highly encourage, if any of this sounds appetizing today, to certainly go ahead and take a look at it and potentially look at scheduling meetings. Now let's talk about what RPA can really do. When I think of RPA and how it structures, it really is a collection of small individual steps. And much like, if anybody is familiar with configuring OnBase workflows, where we have those small building block rules and actions, it is that same type of point and click configuration, but pointed at any application and things that live in or outside of OnBase. We can do things like logging into or out of software applications, even web-based apps. So if you don't have, a good interaction, say you're logging into an online database and you need to perform a lookup, we're able to do that for you. We're able to securely store those credentials, so that way you don't have to go through the process of, memorizing them and even writing them down. I know that's a violation of most IS policies. Moving around folders and files, copying data, interacting with existing interfaces. So if we have a possible API, but we just don't have an integration built, we're able to interact through Hyland RPA. And most of all of this kind of culminates in making decisions. So, we're eliminating that need to memorize all of the steps in this process and then make a decision based on all of the facts and figures leading up. We're able to make this a very seamless decision-making process. Now, all of this is built out, those individual building blocks are built out into a variety of different solutions. Now, these can vary from vertical and what we call horizontal. So vertical being, what industry you're in, but horizontal, just all of those common offices across all industries. Whether we're looking at, going through that data for accounting, like in the office example prior, or if we were moving out all the way out to things like HR or supply chain management, customer service, or generating records for things like IT structures, we're able to automate pretty much anywhere. Now, this is far from an exhaustive list. These are just areas where we've had success in the past. But if you think about it, anytime you're interacting with multiple systems and you have to make decisions based on multiple disparate data points that don't live in the same place, RPA is probably a good candidate. Now, why go for Hyland RPA? Why not just look at any of the numbers of vendors out there on the market? Well, Hyland RPA, as it's already built under the same roof as any of our other portfolio products, we have a really high level of knowledge of our own products. We have pre-built integration points. For example, on the right-hand side, you can see here's where we have actions that are pre-configured to connect directly into your OnBase system. We're also able to make these decisions very quickly and easily and roll out new actions and applications as the roadmap grows for Hyland products. We're also going to be able to make sure that we're not interacting or violating any best practices to make sure that we're making the best investment of both your OnBase or other Hyland products, as well as Hyland RPA. And as I have personally worked with several of the other players on the market, I will say how user-friendly and low-code Hyland RPA is really does stand alone in the industry. So what makes up Hyland RPA? We've talked about where it fits, we've talked about why to pick it, but let's talk about what it actually is. Well, it's a collection of 4 separate programs. Now, this may sound a little complex, but I promise it isn't. First and foremost, what we have is the ANALYST. So this is, think of it as a drop-in helper. So we're able to drop this in and document out a process to make sure that we understand every single step that might go into your potential process. So I need to left click on this button, right click here, fill in my credentials, et cetera, et cetera. This is creating an end-to-end document that documents out an entire process that can then be converted into a pre-made bot. Next, that file, or even if you'd like to start from scratch, goes into Designer. Designer is really where the magic happens. This is where we're dragging and dropping any of our automation pieces, our actions, our rules, any of the rules of the road that we need to follow in a given process. This is also a streamlined test harness. So if you can see in that little screenshot on the right, we have things like play buttons. So as we're building out this process, test it, get its hands dirty, make sure that we're not missing a detail. And Conductor. When I talk about a bot, this is what I'm talking about. Conductor is a collection of configurations. It's a collection, and it orchestrates the execution of any what we call microbots or processes. So this same bot can be executed in a number of different places. It's extremely scalable. And then if you do need more than one, we're able to orchestrate those together. And then finally, Manager. This is your real-time reporting engine for customizing any of your RPA bots. So this is where if I have multiple instances of Conductor, I have 1,000 bots that are all running in sequence. This is where I can report on them all. I can make sure that every step is followed, nothing is falling by the wayside or falling into errors. Now, as we're able to deploy this kind of central administration platform, this is really where any of your administrators might be looking at. We're able to see success rates. We're able to see time to execute. We're able to see any of that nitty-gritty detail that you would like to know about any of the bots running. So when we are measuring success, we measure it in Manager. Now, before I step forward, I actually did want to be able to show you a quick example of what an RPA bot might look like. Now, as I alluded to before, where kind of the magic of RPA happens is within this designer client. Now, just to give a very quick and brief tour throughout this application, if we look in this central pane, this is what we're building. So this is going to be downloading invoices from an external site using saved credentials. And how we build this is all by these pre-built actions. Now we're able to do everything from interacting with an OnBase system. We're adding keywords, getting documents, etc. We're also able to interact with any of your common applications. For example, interacting with mail clients, interacting with Microsoft Outlook, or even just interacting with files. If I needed to grab a directory of files, etc. But as I'm talking about this, I'm actually going to hit play and take my hands off the keyboard. I know there's no real proof that you can see because I don't have my video on, but I can assure you with the next few steps that get taken, this is all RPA running on the back end. So this kind of command prompt running up is what's executing the robot. And it's going to be logging into our supplier website, grabbing any of the open invoices, and then downloading them and switching our statuses. As it saves out to that directory, it is going to be adjudicating to make sure that this was not a copied invoice, etc. And then once it marks that status as closed, it's going to go ahead and ignore our paid invoice. Or I'm sorry, the status is going to get updated to download it. And then it's going to ignore that paid invoice and go all the way down to that third line. Now, as this is running, this very likely wouldn't be something that you would really see run. It would just run seamlessly in the background, maybe triggered off by an email saying, hey, you have a new invoice to download at a portal. But all that said, this is a collection of what is effectively a real life opportunity for automation on the back end. Now, as we look through, I can actually go out to my C drive, and I believe that was under RPA work. And here are those two invoices from Argumentum that we downloaded. Now, this, of course, is only the part of a process, more than likely. At this point, a second RPA configuration could be kicked off to seamlessly bring these into your content system of choice, hopefully OnBase, of course, and then kick forward any of that processing, or maybe even email the folks that should be taking a look at them. But the long and short of this is hopefully this helped to bring home a little bit of what RPA can bring from a automation perspective. this point, I am going to go ahead and stop share. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know we're going to circle back at the end just to make sure everybody has any questions answered.
Thank you, Rich. So appreciate that great demonstration. So wanted to circle back now and talk a little bit about our customer workshop. So what we're very excited to offer to our existing Hyland OnBase customers is the opportunity to actually work with us to do a customer workshop. So what is a customer workshop? It's our ability to work together to actually build a working bot and show that it can actually solve a specific problem that you have and prove out essentially that it works. And so when we talk about doing a workshop, it's really about doing a number of things. Number one, we'd like to define what your business objective is to make sure it makes sense for an RPA application. This is basically coming up with a good use case for an RPA process. We'll then work with you and collaborate to design a working bot. And that bot's going to solve an actual real world problem that we agree on, much like what you saw with Rich's demo. You're then going to have an opportunity to see it accomplish an actual task. And so we could prove that RPA can actually drive those efficiencies that we talked about. It's something that's fun. It's a great way of learning on how RPA works. It's meant to be hands-on and interactive and solve real-world problems. And most of all, there's no cost or obligation. So I highly encourage you, if you are interested in learning more about RPA and have a specific business problem you would like to attack, please let us know. And after today's demonstration, and we can talk about how we can move forward on something like this. With that said, this brings us to the end of our webinar. Was there any questions? And actually, I'm pulling up my chat window now. And first question is, what is a typical timeline an RPA implementation takes? Is this measured in months? Yeah, and so the answer to that is yeah. It really depends on the number of bots that you implement from an RPA perspective, but these typically can be done very, very quickly within sometimes a matter of a couple of weeks. So that's one of the nice things we talked about earlier from an RPA perspective is depending on the complexity of it, these can be implemented very fast. Okay, well, again, this concludes our webinar. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Special thanks to Samantha as well as Rich. And everyone have a great day.